We're joined on the Guernsey Press Politics podcast today, not by a politician, but by someone, if you listen to some people in Guernsey, who is more powerful than all the deputies put together, the state's chief executive, Boley Smillie. Welcome, Boley.
Well, it's a very nice introduction. I'm not sure I'd agree with it, but yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You had a long career at Guernsey Post. You rose to be chief executive in 2010 and did 15 years in that role before becoming the state's chief executive earlier this year. Can you just paint a picture for us about the differences you have found between being the chief executive of Guernsey Post and the chief executive of the States of Guernsey?
Sure, yeah, a brilliant company, Guernsey Post. That's where I did my apprenticeship, as I like to call it. Obviously, scale is the biggest issue. So, sort of 250 employees at Guernsey Post, about 5,500 in the public service. I always used to think at Guernsey Post that I was in the sort of job that you never knew what was going to happen each day. Now I'm really in a job where you never know what's going to happen each day. So the kind of scale and variety of issues that land, at any given moment is significant, which I actually quite enjoy. I love the variety of that, and I really enjoy sort of getting up each morning not knowing what on earth is going to happen.
You're much more distant, I mean, physically from your staff, most of your staff, than you were at Guernsey Post. I mean, you can't get all your staff in a single location now. Do you find that difficult as a people person, as a man manager? Is that hard?
It is. I have to say, during my induction, which arguably is still going on. I'm sure it ever ends. I've really tried hard to get around to as many corners of the public service as I possibly can to kind of meet people and hear about the kind of challenges they're facing. I still feel like I haven't scratched the surface, but genuinely every day I've met someone new in a different setting. It makes it more difficult to some degree, but it's the sort of thing you've really got to work hard at. I think if you lose touch with what's going on in the kind of front line of any organisation, let alone the public service, you're kind of missing out, and that's something I've always tried to do.
We wanted to speak to you today because there have recently been several sets of questions asked by states members about the states as an employer, the public service. So we're not going to be talking about politics, but we're going to be talking about the states as an organisation. One of those areas of questions has been around consultancy, and it's been established that the states have spent, I think, just over 55 million over the past 4 years buying external consultants, sometimes on island and sometimes off island. That's practically £1,000 for every man, woman and child in the island. And the president of P&R has said that sometimes consultants have been used to provide answers the states already know. I mean, that's quite a damning admission, slightly embarrassing for the states, isn't it?
I'd agree wholeheartedly with it. Again, it's an observation I felt I made fairly early on in starting, and sort of continuing from the last question. It's reflected in lots of conversations I have with people within the public service. That I guess it's an environment where every single decision is scrutinised very heavily, and that we should embrace that. That's part of the job. And my assessment of it is that sometimes there's a degree of too much caution. Sometimes we need to kind of be braver about the decisions we're making and the advice that we're giving. I've seen examples where we've kind of backed that up with the views of external expertise, where I have to say I don't think it's always necessary. I don't think it always adds value. That's not to say that there is a time and a place to be investing in that expertise. But yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. We've done it too often on occasions where it hasn't impacted the outcomes any more positively than we would have achieved otherwise.
And these sums are 10 to 15 million pounds a year, to provide a ballpark figure. Do you think that the opportunity perhaps is to save six-figure sums, or are you actually saying that there are from those budgets, there are potentially seven-figure sums to be saved, which could make quite a material difference to the condition of public finances. I know you're not going to want to put an exact number on it, but just to give us a flavour of what you're thinking.
Well, I'm sure we'll go on to talk about the savings target in the 2026 budget, and that stands at about £4 million for next year. The vast majority of that will come from consultancy, and again, I want to stress. Not all consultancy is bad consultancy. There are we are getting most of the time what we ask for. I'm just questioning, why we're asking for it a lot of the time. But it is in the top three things that people within the organisation talk to me about. Say, why don't we get asked the question? Why can't we make the decisions? Why is our advice not sufficient enough?
Now, the £4 million savings target that you mentioned in next year's budget, I mean, that the net budget proposal is for an increase in spending of 8 million, but that is new spending effectively of 12 million, and then the £4 million of savings netted off. And they are being, the claim is, the expectation is that they will be genuine efficiency savings. Now, in future years, how far do you think that can be taken? Because if there are efficiency savings, that's an organisational issue. I mean, there are some political decisions that need to be taken in there, but that really, they are the type of savings for which you ultimately would be responsible rather than the states at a political level. How far do you think you could take that figure? 4 million doesn't sound a great deal in the context of a 650 odd £million budget. Are you thinking you can take that? Can that be doubled in future years? Could it go into the tens of millions? You must by now, after 9 or 10 months in role, have a handle on the opportunities for efficiency savings.
Yeah, I'll get to the answer. I'll give you a bit of context first, I think. So first of all, I think what's fundamentally flawed in the way that we've tried to address the issue of savings, and when I say savings, I don't mean charging people more for certain things. I don't mean kind of wooden dollars moving costs from one department to the other. I mean genuine efficiency. So effectively doing the same for less. So when I look over the history, and I haven't done a deep dive on previous initiatives, but they tend to be very top down approached. So they tend to be, probably people like me and politicians sat in a room determining that each committee must reduce their expenditure by X percent, and more often than not, and in fact almost every case, change on that basis is never achieved without a degree of pain, and it very rarely is sustainable. So when I look at the previous efforts, very rarely does that have kind of buy-in on what I call the kind of front line of the public service, and very rarely does it stick. So we might achieve some short-term savings, but 2 or 3 years later, my assessment is you start to see those costs coming back because there have been consequences of that. So there's a cultural change, and I would look at the 2026 budget as the first phase of two. So we've got to identify, and I take your point around costs are going up overall. But if we take the 4 million as 4 million, what's almost more important than the number is the fact we're seen to achieve it. So we've got to start building some confidence in the public service that we're able to look at what we do it better, and actually deliver the results that we set out to achieve. Thereafter, we've really got to switch the emphasis so that change is, I guess, promoted from the bottom up. And you can articulate that in a number of ways. Zero-based budget, but I again, in my induction, having had the kind of privilege of going around to speak to so many different public servants in so many different areas, there are more ideas about how we could work more efficiently than I could deal with in a lifetime. There is, so it's a huge organisation, but culturally, it's not an organisation that's saying we don't want to change. There are so many good people doing good things that could do much better if we equip them to do it. And that's where I would see us moving to over 2026 and beyond, is getting to a point where we are not setting these high level efficiency targets, that the budget process is far more focused on what we're doing historically and how we can do that better, rather than just taking it as a given. And that's the kind of next observation I would make, having been through my first budgeting process, which admittedly was difficult because of the timing of the election. Something I know several other, lots of the politicians have kind of struggled with to have an impact early on. In many ways, without wanting to do anyone a disservice, it ignores one of the most fundamental issues, which is what do we do last year and how can we do it better? It very much takes the view of, what we did last year is almost in the bag. Add inflation. Now, what else do we want to do? So from a cost control perspective, all we're trying to address then is the gradient at which costs are going to increase, when what we should be doing is fundamentally looking at whether we can do things a lot better. And that's where the employees within the public service have all the ideas that we need to. People like me have just got to make sure they're empowered to be able to get on with it. Now, to get to that's a very long-winded answer to your very simple question, which is what's the scale of the potential? I don't know is the honest answer, but it's millions, and I think that's reflected in 2026. And I think thereafter we need to continue to make sure we cut our cloth accordingly.
There's going to be this debate next summer about the long-term state of public finances, and inevitably there are going to be proposals to raise additional revenue, and P&R are working through those options at the moment. But are you advising the committee that package of measures to deal with the structural deficit can include at least some measure of efficiency savings?
Yeah, I mean, I think for another reason, I think it's important, first of all, and that is, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job being a politician, and they are faced with having to make some really tough decisions. Tax is probably the most difficult one that they're going to have to either reaffirm or change course in the first 6 months of next year. What I see is, as part of making that decision, it's incredibly important that the community feels like they're engaged on the subject as well. And I can see real effort at trying to make that happen. The most important role the public service plays, I think, in that, as well as generally supporting the politicians, is making sure we're doing absolutely everything we can to help build the trust and confidence. So, for example, there are areas where we're not performing as we should be. Revenue service is the classic example that keeps getting raised, rightly so, every time there's any discussion about changing anything, whether that's new taxes or anything else. So, first and foremost, we have to make sure that as a public service, we're seen to be as efficient as we possibly can. It's why I said that almost more important than the number that we're saving, it is important that we're delivering what we promise, in order to kind of make those decisions for the politicians as not easy. They will be very difficult, but easier than they otherwise won't be if we haven't got the community on our side.
I want to return to pay costs and the size of the public sector in a moment, but let's just run through some of the issues that have been raised in written questions by States members. There were some questions about probation. I think there is a national study, but it's aging now, and we're 10 years old, which found that up to 20% of people fail their probation. And so far this year in the States, the answers to the questions revealed that 2.5% had failed. So that means that 97 or 98 people in every 100 recruited by the States are passing their probation. What conclusions do you draw from that? Do you think that indicates that it's too easy to pass probation in the States, or is that figure about what you would expect?
So that's a really good way you've positioned that, because a lot of the feedback I've received is that the number is too high, and that's, that there's some irony there, because when people generally in the community talk about performance of management of the civil service, it's perceived as to be, not where it should be. That number is, instinctively is about where I would hope it would be. If it was zero, I would rightly expect to be challenged on, well, what's the point of a probation if everyone is passing it? Certainly, the having taken a reasonably high level look at it, a lot of the things that we're doing are right. We can always improve, but it's about where I would expect it to be. But it is evidence that performance is being scrutinised in the early days of someone's employment. We would, when we go through a recruitment process, we would never want it to end in that way. But by definition, recruitment processes can only tell you so much. It's as much about the employee also making up their mind about, well, they want to work for the state of Guernsey as well. So it's not just a one-way process, but instinctively it's about where I would expect it to be.
Working from home is another area where P&R has faced some questions. And I noticed that in their replies, they said that the policy was under review. I infer from that there may already be a decision, that there may be an assumption that there needs to be a change to that policy if it's being reviewed. Otherwise, why review it? Now, you'll be leading that, or you'll have to sign off on any of those changes. Do you think it is likely that the policy will change? Do you think there are some areas of the public sector where there is too much working from home, or maybe more opportunities to work from home?
So again, one of the benefit, I think it's a real opportunity of the public sector. We're talking about 5,500 employees. I could give you 10 examples of just about every single subject matter you could throw at me where things are working really well. And I could give you similarly 10 examples of where it's not working well. So when we talk specifically about remote working, working from home, flexible working, whatever we want to call it, as with any employment policy, there will be aspects of it where it is really very positive and where it's not working. I understand, like in many organisations, this sort of policy was conceived during COVID rather quickly due to the circumstances that we were faced with at the time. I do expect it will change, but I don't think it will disappear. One of the things that troubles me about the situation at the moment is there is as part of a kind of property rationalisation process, which was undertaken and has been undertaken for some years, that inbuilt within that policy, there is a requirement for some people to kind of work from home. So I don't think that's as healthy as it should be. I think people should have a desk to come and work from, available to them all the time. The reality of that isn't the case. If I may, I'll just talk specifically about revenue service, because that specifically came up in those questions. And I understand at any given time there's between 20 and 30 people within revenue service that work from home. And I understand why people would look at that and say, that's got to be a problem given the service isn't where we need it to be right now. It isn't. That is not the issue that is causing the issues within revenue service at the moment. But the reality is the offices that team work in cannot accommodate all of the people all of the time. And I in answer to your sort of question, we need to change that. We need to make sure there is desk space for everyone, and that we're not requiring people to work from home, because I think that's where we kind of
that has been partially what has driven the working from home policy, isn't it? And,
it has.
And I think you're saying that should just not be a factor. There may be a case for some people to work from home some of the time, but it shouldn't be because there isn't enough office space. That is your approach to it?
Yeah, the things I'll be testing are, first and foremost, are we does the practical application of the policy more so than the policy, is it in any way impacting the customer negatively? I'm not sure customer is the right term, but in different settings it will mean different things. If that's the case, then we need to change that. That we've got to make sure the customers at the heart of everything that we do. Thereafter, there isn't many organisations that aren't offering some sort of remote working flexible policy. It can and should be and is being used very positively, and there is a space for it, I believe, in every kind of modern office. So we won't be removing it completely. We will be refining it. It should be constantly under review. Again, the scale of the public service, you will find. I'm not going to sit here and say there are no people issues, there are no performance management issues. There are, but there are in every organisation. There are areas where our performance management is not up to the standard we need it to be. But there are other areas that I've seen where there are excellent examples of people's performance being managed really, really well, constructively and positively to the benefit of the employee, the manager, and the community.
As at the end of August, there were 77 States employees who were on long-term sick leave, and the current cost of sick pay for them was £975,000. Now that was revealed in another set of questions that was asked. Now I know the States is the largest employer, and so the numbers are going to sound quite high, but even on a kind of pro rata basis, if a medium-sized company had long-term sick leave like that, it would have perhaps one, maybe two members of staff on long-term sick all the time. And I don't think that is the experience of every medium-sized company. Do you think that figure, were you surprised when you learned that 77 staff were on long-term sick? That was at one snapshot in time, and that the cost was very nearly £1 million.
Yeah, and I think the way I looked at it first of all was the number, and you're right. It's a big number, but when you consider that relative to the side of the organisation, so we started talking, about my career at Guernsey Post. I'd be horrified if that was the number there, but you're talking about an organisation that is much, much smaller. We define within the States of Guernsey long-term sickness as anything more than 21 days, and to some degree, I'm not sure that truly reflects what I would consider long-term sickness. It is an area that's one of the areas in terms of kind of people management that's at the forefront of what I'm trying to achieve more broadly, not just with long-term sick, but making sure our managers are equipped as well as they need to be to make sure we're getting the very best out of our employees. So, I can't sit here and say that number isn't a concern because it's such a big number relative to the size of the organisation. It puts it into perspective, and I'm not sure it's too dissimilar to any other benchmarks that we might compare with across any other organisations based on that scale.
Before we get into more specifics about the size of the public sector, perception, you will be aware from conversations you have, things you read in the media, that there is quite a strongly held view out there amongst the public that there are too many civil servants, we're paying them too much, and that is at the root of the state's financial problems. And actually, most of the deficit could be dealt with by the civil service in particular, but the public sector more generally being more efficient. How does that make you feel? I mean, how that, in a sense, that perception is slightly fraying the relationship there needs to be between the taxpayer and the public sector, isn't it? I mean, is there anything you can do in general terms to try to counter that perception? Do you accept any part of that perception, or do you think it's completely inaccurate?
Well, there are extremes, and again, this is one of the interesting parts about the roles. You're constantly under that level of scrutiny, which I think we should embrace. First of all, what we don't do very well, particularly, is the civil service does certainly get more than its fair share of I guess high level scrutiny and criticism in that regard. We don't try and influence that narrative as much as we should do. So I would always much prefer to be criticised constructively or otherwise for the reality rather than the perception. And I don't think right now we do a good enough job to open up the world that is the civil service to show what's behind, the doors of Frostshot House. And that's definitely something I want to achieve, over the next 6 to 12 months is break that down for people. So let's stop talking about 1,500 civil servants. Let's show people, where they are, what they're doing, what their objectives are, what our expectations of them are, and let's give people more information upon which to pass comment. We'll start that process soon with something that I've certainly had a lot of encouragement from Policy and Resources to publish my own objectives. So we're all, as civil servants, we're all judged on what people perceive as our objectives. Well, let's be judged on what our actual objectives are. So that'll be the first step. And I'm really, really intent on seeing far more transparency. And I say transparency not in the context that people are purposely hiding things. We just need to do more to explain, what we're doing and why it takes this many people to do relevant things. Now, the flip side of that is, I've said, in answer to some of your other questions, we can be more efficient. So, that applies to the civil service as much as it does anywhere else within the public service. And so, we do need to be a lot more efficient as an organisation. Maybe the transparency that I'm talking about will help us achieve that. But we also need to equip people better than we do today. And I'll come back to my immediate priority, which is revenue service. Revenue service, the people within revenue service that are kind of on the front line, working every day to try and address the issue, are not the reason that we're so far behind on repayments and tax assessments, and are not the reason that we've had problems for, I think, well over 10 years in that particular area. The problem is that people like me have not equipped them properly to deal with the work that they have to do. So they have, the technology, their IT, their systems are not up to the job, and that is why we're in the situation that we're in. And when we address efficiency right across the civil service, not just in that area, we have to equip people far better to be able to deliver what we expect of them.
You've spent quite a lot of time looking at problems at the revenue service, recognising how much it is affecting taxpayers. But you haven't before now put any kind of date on when you think, I'm not saying everything will be resolved, there will always be some challenges, but when do you think taxpayers will be able to receive from the revenue service a reasonable level of service, which many thousands of them are not receiving at the moment? Are we talking weeks, months, or years?
It's certainly months. And I'm unhappy with the answer I'm about to give. And the truth is, I don't know. What I do know is that we're not, still not making sufficient progress to be able to answer that question properly. And I really want to answer that question properly, but there is certainly not one simple fix that will kind of bring all this to a satisfactory conclusion. I've done a couple of sessions with all of the staff from Revenue Service, and we've talked about this. To some degree, they are totally consumed in dealing with the effects of the backlogs that we're dealing with, and until we clear that, it is very difficult to kind of set out timescales and actions that will start to improve the service we offer. Not just kind of keep up with it. But if you ask me the question, if you ask me the question in a year's time, for example, and we haven't made significant progress in this area, then I would expect to be held accountable for that.
Simplistic question, probably, but are there ways of just writing off aspects of the backlog, and that actually, I mean, you may have to forego the collection of some tax income, but it may be a relatively small amount of money compared to how much is having to be spent to try to put these things right. I mean, is there a moratorium? Is not perhaps quite the right word, but is there something that can be done to write off some of that backlog without having to work all the way through it? Because that is what's causing so much of the problem, isn't it?
It is, and again, it's the perfect, not in the right way. It's the perfect example, though, of where the team have so many ideas, like literally hundreds of ideas about how they could do things better. They're just almost under siege in terms of the workload they've got. There's also really positive ideas coming from particularly the kind of accountancy industry, the sort of small to medium size accountants, where they are genuinely coming up with ways that certainly to me sound very practical in terms of how we might address my key objective at the moment. I think that lands squarely with me is, how do I create enough capacity or space for those teams to be able to work on those things and deliver them. I genuinely believe at some point in the future, we'll never look back and think that was the best thing that ever happened to us. But it is, given it is where it is right now, if we can get it back to a sound footing, is a really good example that we can get ourselves out of situations like this. We can make a positive difference. For me, having sort of championed the case that if we can flip around and stop making this a kind of top-down approach to change, and start to empower people to deliver that change themselves, then it is the perfect case study for me to use in other areas of the organisation. So there are lots of things I'd like to achieve. I can't think of one more important than that right now.
Total pay costs, I was looking at budgets last night. In 2020, the state's pay costs were 234 million. And this year they're expected to be in the region of 330 or 340 million. But if inflation is applied to the 2020 figure, they would be closer to 310 million. Now, that implies that there has been growth of about 20 or 25 million in real terms in pay costs. Now, you're not responsible for that, because those are decisions that predate your arrival as chief executive. But do you think that that's good value for money? Do you think that pay costs are going to need to go on increasing in real terms, or are we going to look back and see this 4, 5, 6 year period as unusual and something that has to change in the public sector?
It has to change. I mean, we can't afford for that trend to continue. And I mean, the island, the Bailey, we can't carry on like that. There are two things that I would say are fundamental to addressing that issue. The first we touched on earlier is that the way in which the states of Guernsey budgets does not lend itself to addressing the issue first and foremost. So it's very much about this is what you did last year plus inflation. Now let's talk about what else we need to do. We fundamentally need to take a much stronger look at what we're doing already and how we can do that better. Otherwise, as I said earlier, we're just trying to reduce the gradient at which costs increase when we should be trying to reverse it. So that's the first issue. The second issue is around prioritization, and if we have a culture of just wanting to do more and more and more and more, then it's going to cost more and more and more and more, and the effect of the efficiencies that we can find get dwarfed by the fact that we have to kind of respond, and that's where the relationship between the assembly and the public service is so important. We really need to make sure we're prioritising what's necessary rather than what we almost like to do. And I think, again, looking forward, if we can create an environment where to fund the new stuff we might want to do, and I mean that, largely politically, it must at least in part be funded by the efficiencies we've gained from doing things better, then that's quite an incentive actually to deliver reform. Change, when we look at change through the budgeting process as well, change doesn't happen in nice annual increments. So we might it's easy to look at spending a lot more simplistically. So we know we can spend money at any given point during the year and deliver certain outcomes. Change sometimes takes a little bit longer than that. So there's a kind of misalignment between that budget process and the kind of incentive and focus on addressing more fundamentally the kind of what's termed as business as usual. It's anything but business as usual, but we definitely need to create more time and space where we look at that, because we simply cannot afford to continue on the path that we are.
Public expectations, of course, have something to do with that as well. And I mean, all around the world, states have grown in response to increased public expectations. In Guernsey, we have ended up in a situation where the public sector is now the largest employer. It's in recent years has overtaken even the finance industry. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that our public sector is large by international standards, because it's not. But nevertheless, it is now our largest employer. Does that present a problem? Do you think that needs to be changed in the years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have I would love to make it the second biggest, and then third. But there is at risk of repeating myself a little bit. The public sector, the people within the public sector, largely are working really, really hard, and within the civil service as well. That won't be a popular view, given what you were saying earlier. It is not, though, an organisation that doesn't have its challenges like every other organisation. That's why I keep saying there are most definitely opportunities for efficiency. Probably one of the single biggest issues that has surprised is probably is the right word. Has surprised me coming into the role is our technology is nowhere near where it needs to be. Nowhere near. Too many IT projects have not delivered the outcomes they were supposed to deliver, which makes life so much more difficult for those people that are delivering jobs. Again, on the kind of front line, we have to, as an organisation, get much better at delivering the outcomes we promise. And so when I look across, what we've got going on now as an organisation, first and foremost, I would say there's just too much. We have to prioritise better. Ultimately, with our kind of political masters and as a public service in terms of that our reforms, we need to create capacity where we are delivering better results, and that will, in time, breed some trust and confidence. But we simply can't keep growing at the rate that we have been, and equally, we can't just keep trying the same things that we've kept trying over and over again. We've got to do something different. Hence my point earlier about we've got to put change in the hands of the people who actually know how they can, deliver better results.
My final question is really about accountability. In Guernsey, politicians have much less direct control over civil servants than is typical in other jurisdictions. And there are all sorts of historic reasons and systemic reasons for that. Do you think that remains right for Guernsey, or do you think it would improve accountability in the public sector if politicians, if committee presidents then had more influence over the civil servants who serve them, had more influence over transferring staff, and if senior officers in committees were actually more directly accountable to, as you called them before, their political masters? Or do you not think that kind of model can work in a small place?
I think it can, and I'd give two different perspectives on it. So first and foremost, I think there's often a lot of discussion about, what's operational and what's policy. And, politicians should stick to policy and the public service should deliver the operational bit. And I don't subscribe to that. I think, certainly in the committee setting, more often than not, it's politicians that appear on the front of the newspaper or on the radio if something has gone wrong. And they should absolutely be scrutinising the operational performance of their particular committees and more broadly the wider public services, much more akin to a non-executive director and scrutinising the work of the executive directors in a company. I think that's often a conversation that we don't need to define what's policy and what's operational. We don't need to draw that line. We should just embrace that level of scrutiny wherever it comes. If I could wave a wand, I would move to an environment where particularly the civil service structures are far more aligned with the political committees. I think it would be really healthy if we had senior officers with objectives that are signed off by those political committees, and that's something I will certainly be trying to achieve once this the current assembly have, to be fair, got their feet under the table a little bit more. Because I think that there's a lot of subjective views about what people should be doing, which we can do away with relatively quickly just by kind of committing to paper. This is the expectations. This is what we expect to deliver. This is when. Make sure people are properly supported. Let them get on with it. And where I see things maybe slightly differently to some who call out for accountability, I see it more positively. It's like it's not about who are we going to discipline or sack when things go wrong. It should be about who are we going to praise when it's gone well. Because there's no one, I think, on Guernsey that doesn't want the public service and the civil service, and more broadly the States Assembly, to be achieving really good things for Guernsey, and that's the focus I think we've got to move to.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll have the opportunity to catch up with you again in a few months' time. It's been an interesting discussion. Thank you for your time today, Boley Smillie.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.